A very warm welcome to another episode on Awaz-e-Haqiqat, which also kind of translates to the voice of truth, where we try and destigmatize or um, we try to break down certain South Asian legacies. And on that note, I'm joined by a very, very prolific guest this evening or afternoon, depending on whichever part of the world you're listening to me from. And we will be talking about money and relationships, rather money through different phases of relationships. And before we jump into the relationship, I'm joined by Professor Supriya Singh, who is a writer and a sociologist of money. Supriya was born in India, grew up in Delhi, and moved to Malaysia in 1967. In 1986, she migrated to Australia. She lives in her homes in Melbourne and Dharamshala. Her recent books are Domestic Economic Abuse, The Violence of Money, A House Over the Diamond Creek, A Whimsical Journey Through the Gardens and Life, Money, Migration and Family, India to Australia, and The Girls Ate Last. Supriya is also the adjunct professor, Department of Social Inquiry at Trobe University, Melbourne, and is the co-chair of the Multicultural Women's Alliance Against Family Violence. On that note, good evening, Supriya. How are you doing?
Thanks, Chris.
As always, it's a pleasure to have you, pleasure to absorb the knowledge from you and get inspired from you.
You're kind.
Now, thank you for doing this with me, but I will straight away jump in the conversation, Professor. And I think the first question, this is a very important topic, especially we don't discuss it as much as we should have been doing. So the first question that I want to ask you is, most of us want to learn more about money, but yet there's a taboo about talking of money. How do we manage this dichotomy?
Usually we manage it in a roundabout way. Most of us want to know a lot about money and relationships, and depends upon where you are and what context you're talking about.
Yeah.
So sometimes you go about it the roundabout way. You want to kind of position the person, a new person, in his or her social and economic context. You don't sort of say, how much do you earn?
Yeah.
Over here in Australia, you'd say, where do you live? Or where do your children go to school?
Yeah.
It's an immediate kind of pinpointing, as it were, as to where you are.
Yeah.
In India also, you wouldn't, in a third-class railway compartment long ago, I know the questions would come fast, how much, who's your father, how much does he earn, how much does your husband earn? But in middle-income urban India, you don't ask those questions. You also kind of say, where do you live? Where did you go to university? Those kinds of things. So it's a roundabout way. You can ask a question or by not asking the question.
True. But Professor, are these really welcome questions? Because I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. I was asked, how many bedrooms does your house have? And the other question was, which suburb have you brought your house in? So I guess the suburb also is kind of a measure of your net worth. So are these really welcome questions that people are asking?
Not always welcome. Again, depends on whether the person is a stranger or whether your kids are, together, or sometimes you just want to know whether it's convenient to meet. But you can ask them in a variety of ways. Sometimes when migrants meet each other, they say, where do you live in India? And you say in Delhi, you say where? Part of it is to find out whether you come from the same neighborhood. But part of it is also to find out, whether you share the same kind of experiences. It doesn't always mean, depending upon the tone and how you're asked, because you're going to ask them back. In Dharamshala, I remember a friend of mine, a Malaysian Indian friend of mine, came to visit me. And where I live is a lower middle, neighborhood. And they wanted to know who she was and what her background was. So they asked her, what's your father's name? Okay, now in India, that's a very, that question immediately gives you your caste,
Yes.
maybe the region.
Yep.
But then they asked her, which village did your father come from? And long ago. And so she said, they said, oh, all right, you're from that part of Punjab. And it's just, you want to, and sometimes people will ask, another friend came and she was Anglo-Celtic. And they looked at her and she wasn't wearing any bangles or anything. So they asked me, she's very sober. Is she a widow? And so I quickly gave her a bangle before anybody asked her any more sensitive questions. So
Speaking from experience, these questions, I think, swim on a very fine line, and often people tend to forget that fine line, where to stop and where to kind of is okay to ask more or prod more. That's what
But Chris, there are cultural ways of not answering the question.
That's true.
In Malaysia, among the Indians, if people, and even in India, if you ask a business person, how are you doing?
Yeah,
she's not going to answer. The thing is, it's God's grace, or enough for my rice bowl, kind of. So you don't answer. They might ask, but you don't answer, and everybody knows what's happening.
Yeah, true. But the other part of this conversation is, Professor, when you have to talk about these issues, finances, with your partner, present partner or future partner, right? How do you deal with the situation if that person is not ready to talk about finances?
To the young women in my life, who have the opportunity to have a conversation, usually with their partner, if the person is not willing to talk about or share their story of money, how they grew up with money, how they hope to use money as a medium of freedom, you really have to rethink whether you want to have that person as a partner. Because money is very intimate.
True.
And it's not that they're not talking about money only. What it says is that they're not wanting to be open to intimacy. In an arranged marriage, these things are very openly discussed. Person should come from the same kind of background, same kind of class, socioeconomic grouping. But when you're meeting somebody out of family context, I think it's extremely important to share your story of money and to listen to the other person's story of money. Doesn't mean it always has to be the same. But if we don't hear each other's stories of money, you assume that the other person has grown up with money in the same way.
Right.
I'm not saying that sharing your stories of money is a fireproof against financial and economic abuse. But what it does is it makes you yourself very reflective on how you want to treat money as a way of connecting rather than as a way of, tearing apart.
Right. But what happens, Professor, is often we have heard as women, our parents are usually, how marriage settings work in South Asia, right? So parents of the woman are usually very skeptical that, don't broach any topic that might kind of piss off the bridegroom or something like that. Often mothers of the daughters tell the daughters, don't talk about these things. It's okay. You guys will figure it out later. What happens in that situation where the parents are scared that we might lose this alliance if we talk about hard topics like these?
Nowadays, Chris, at least in Australia, when I'm seeing the young women come as brides, they are often, with graduate and professional education.
Yeah.
And they often have managerial jobs in India before
Mm.
they come. I've heard the other side.
Mm.
Parents are worried sometimes that maybe the signs aren't quite right.
Mm.
But sometimes it's the woman who's had this lovely email conversation and a few visits from the guy from Australia, and she's saying, well, we're going to Australia, and I think I like him. He sounds really nice.
Mm.
And unfortunately, later on, it's the parents who turn out to be right.
Mm.
Uh, sometimes everybody can get it wrong, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then if you have reflected on how you want to use money in your life,
Mm.
when things go wrong, your radar is very alive.
Yeah.
And you find out even sometimes if you have talked about it and the guy has said yes, 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 actually he didn't mean yes, yes, yes.
Mm. Mm. True.
And I have a story. I interviewed a young woman who was a software engineer, and she actually met the person in Australia, was from a different part of India. And she had told him that, uh, she would like to have some money joined, some money separate, and her father was not well, and she was the main earner, and she's going to send money home. And if you don't like this, well, we should really reconsider
Yeah.
the relationship. And he was okay with it. As soon as they got married, he started asking her, why are you sending money home?
Mm.
You're now married, you belong to my family, your money is my money, and you shouldn't be sending money home. And this was also accompanied by other emotional abuse and
Yeah.
later on physical abuse. But she immediately recognized, that he was trying to control her.
Mm. Mm.
And she left the marriage within 2 years. So the faster you leave, the less traumatized you
Mm.
are
That's
in
true.
this condition.
That's true. Thanks, Professor. But moving on to the other part and phase of our lives is when we are trying to plan a family, when we are trying to have a child, how does the family dynamic change with finances when there is a baby on the way?
Look, a lot of the women that I've spoken to have been very worried about this
Mm.
because usually they've been in paid work, they've
Mm.
had money of their own,
Yeah.
they haven't had to ask anybody, before they could spend it or they could decide what they wanted to do with it. In India, at least, you often have the choice of having paid help, sometimes supervised by family,
Yeah.
and you don't have to leave paid work.
Mm. Mm.
Sometimes you might choose to, but you don't have to. Over here in Australia, the couple have to decide how they're going to look after the child.
Mm. Yeah.
And with socialization, and often the woman herself wants to be at home with the child, at least for the first few months.
Mm.
And if the husband is earning more, they see in terms of the budget, maybe he should continue work and she will stop work. They discuss budgets easily.
Mm.
Will we have enough?
Yeah.
What they don't discuss, and sometimes it's the woman who's not voicing her concerns.
Mm.
I became aware of it when I asked a friend of mine, how did you succeed, in having a happy family, so consultative? And she said, I was actually terrified of having children. So I told my husband, uh, uh, I don't want to be without money of my own.
Mm.
And he could understand what I was talking about because he said, well, it's going to be joint. But money that you earn and spend feels different
Yes.
from money that's sitting in the joint account.
Yeah.
You usually feel it's all right to spend it on the home and the children.
Mm.
But you kind of wonder, will I feel free enough to buy a dress, to have a pedicure and a manicure, or to buy a present for somebody without having to, have my expenditure, even if not directly monitored, kind of seen.
Yeah, yeah.
So she actually expressed this unease, and he listened. And so they worked out a way of directly crediting her account, every month, so that she had money of her own. So sometimes we have to talk about how we feel about this situation. And you might also worry, or I actually worry for some of the younger women, when, in this big glow of early motherhood, they say, I'm going to leave my job totally.
Yeah.
And I myself found that it took me 25 years to get back to what I was doing. Because if you leave your paid work for 6-7 years, especially in a migrant background, you find you have to rebrand yourself.
True.
And you need to keep a toehold. And what a lot of women do not discuss, at least I've seen a silence on this, they, if they're in their 20s and they leave their paid work, superannuation in retirement when in the 60s or 70s is not front of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is this big gap in your working life and maybe not being able to get back to speed easily that makes retirement a very difficult stage for a lot of women. And a lot of homelessness happens when things don't go according to plan.
Sounds very scary, but I think that is the exact reason why we should be having these conversations, and at the right time at different stages, as you mentioned, Professor. I'll ask you a very simple question, but maybe you can elaborate it for our listeners. Is, in your experience and opinion, Professor, how do finances impact a normal relationship, any XYZ relationship?
Money is a medium of care.
Yeah.
But money can also become a medium of abuse.
Yes, true.
So most of us, especially if we are migrants and our parents are elsewhere, we send money home, not always because of need. We send money home to show ourselves that we still belong to the family.
Yeah.
We send it so that our parents know we care.
True.
Yeah. But if you are using money to exert control and take away another person's right to be who they are, then money becomes financial abuse and family violence, which can lead to ill health, mental and physical, and lasting trauma. So we have to be very careful how we use money. When you use money with morality and with responsibility, it makes for family well-being. But when you use money like just for your own gratification, ignoring the welfare of the rest of the family, and I'm not just talking of nuclear family here, most of us see our family as broader than the nuclear family, then it tears one apart.
Yes.
So that is why it is so important to get the emotional, cultural, and social meanings of money right.
Absolutely. Very, very important. But you just mentioned about that we send money back to our parents because most of us are migrants, our families are back home, right? I think this is another important aspect in your relationship, that talking about money with your parents. So in that regard, Professor, what are some of the discussions about finances or money that migrant children should be having with their parents?
Again, depends upon the stage of life. In terms of sending money, sometimes there's a huge problem in that the parents don't really know the framework of your life over here.
Hmm.
If they ask you how much you're earning and you tell them in Australian dollars, they immediately convert it into rupees, yeah?
Yes.
And it sounds a lot as if you're really loading it. And sometimes migrants also play it up, yeah? They might be driving a taxi over here. They say we are in the transport business, right?
Yeah.
And now, of course, in small towns, you don't need to mask it. Everybody knows that you go back and you're a student, you become a taxi driver if you're male generally. But so they kind of expect that you have a lot of discretionary income. So sometimes what happens is it's difficult to tell your parents. If they are in need, of course, people, migrants over here, they curb their essential expenditure also to send money home. But if you're wanting to send money home for a 5-bedroom house with marble floors, and you yourself are not able to get proper housing over here, what the trigger is if you invite your parents to come and see your life here.
Yes.
When they come over here, after the first few days of, oohing and eyeing, they kind of realize actually their own life in India is much less stressful and they have a better quality of life.
True.
Here you're working 10, 12 hours a day, and so much of your money is going just on housing and the utilities, with so little money being left over, that then it's easier to talk when they understand it. Otherwise, sending money home sometimes, especially in the early stages of work and settlement, can become a huge burden.
But so what happens is, sorry to cut you off. Often the children are loaded with that emotional guilt, right? That, oh my God, my parents have sent me here. I would rather neglect myself but send the money back, just to, as a measure of saying thank you and as a paying of, maybe repaying the student loan and whatnot. How do we tackle that emotional baggage that comes with it?
This used to be actually more in my generation than yours, Chris, because in my generation, like people who came in the 70s and the 80s, at that time, and it was mainly professionals who were doing okay. It was usually a man's decision to further his career that brought the migrant family and the migrant nuclear family over. It was an individual decision, not a family decision. But at least in Australia, after the mid-1990s, it really became a family decision as to whether migration is not just good for the individual migrant, but whether the individual migrant is going there as a first step towards greater family prosperity, both of the siblings and of the parents. And so even the migrants over here are very conscious. Yes, they would pay the loans off, but they're very conscious when they are looking for a home. They don't do the usual normal Anglo-Celtic thing of buying a small apartment, nearer the city. They want a 4-bedroom house, which includes a prayer room or a theater room, and so they buy it with land in the outer suburbs, because they are already planning that, their parents will visit, or they hope even stay when the need comes. So they are planning in terms of family prosperity. So then the conversations become very different. The problem that arises then is how parents talk to their children about money. And that becomes quite tricky, because the parent, say you're a parent migrant and you have come to join, all your children are here, they're married, you have grandchildren. And the children are also saying, what are you doing there all alone? After a while, you also want to be a family, you want to be seen to be a family, you want everyday contact with your grandchildren. But the morality of money in India is that parents feel obliged to help their adult children in a timely fashion. And so when they come over here, the children are in the early stages of settlement. The parents feel they want to help them with the mortgage, with the business. So nearly all the parent migrants I've talked to have sold all or most of their property in India. Some might have a pension in India, one keeps a flat in India, and they come over here. Now, when they come over here, first they have to pay high visa fees, For a couple, it can go anywhere up to 120,000 if you take all the other costs. And then they don't want to come empty-handed. And here, still, the preference is to live with the son.
Right.
So they hand nearly all their money or a very huge chunk of their money to the son to pay the mortgage and don't document it.
Okay.
Because after all, they see, as in India, money belongs to the family.
Yeah.
We're all family together. But here the laws are different. First, what happens, for the first 10 years, they get they get Medicare, but no other social welfare support. Unlike in the US, there's subsidized housing, there's welfare as soon as you come. So that means sometimes even for everyday expenditure, they've handed a huge sum of money to their son. But now he will manage that money. And he is the one who gives them money, for their expenditure. And sometimes parents are not used to being, they've always felt they were on the giving side, not the receiving side, even though they've handed a lot of money. Heaven forbid the son and daughter-in-law divorce. Now, in India, there's a separate property regime. When you divorce, unless you have a very good lawyer or whatever, you only live with what you brought in and whatever property is in your name. But in Australia, we have the community property regime where the default is that, the marital home, superannuation, other assets will get divided equally. And if you have young children and the young children are with the mother, she'll get a bit more, And without documentation, of course, all the money that they've handed to the son becomes the couple's money. Nothing to do with the parents. So they find themselves in situations that they had never thought about. So I think it behoves the children also to tell them, look, this is wonderful of you, but let's formalize the deal a little bit. Or you keep enough money for yourself. Because the parents don't keep enough money, unlike the Indians who have aged here, the parents who migrate later in life, nearly it will be very unusual for them not to stay with the son, daughter-in-law, and the grandchildren in a house owned by the son and daughter-in-law. This is the upside-down joint family. They don't have the means actually anymore to buy a place, say, next to the son.
And I think, that's a very complicated situation. But as you mentioned,
it's happening a lot now.
Oh, is it? Okay. So, and that is the reason that we need to start talking with our parents, because most of us, we want to bring our parents here, but what is the after effect? What are the repercussions is something we need to look into more closely. One last question, Professor, before we kind of wrap up, is money after divorce, unfortunate situation. If there's a divorce, a couple hits rock bottom, how does the couple navigate that situation?
Well, it depends where you are, right? If we're talking Australia, as I said, it is a community property regime. But the woman might be left with half the house, or even if she's left with the house, she still needs money to survive and pay the mortgage. That is why if you have a paid job, you better hold on to it, because not having a paid job after divorce, unless the settlement has been something that makes you secure for life, is not feasible. And the other thing that I think sometimes, and I think most of us need to be aware of it, that even when you are in marriage, you need to feel equally responsible and informed about the money in the marriage. Sometimes women themselves will say in a kind of airy-fairy manner, oh, I don't want to think about the money. He does it all. He does it all.
True. Yeah.
Well, if you get divorced and he does it all, you've got a huge learning curve. So you need to know about where the money is, how it is doing, where it is invested, and how you can manage within a budget. And if you don't know that, then the first thing you really do in Australia, and we are fortunate about that, you go to a financial counselor and see exactly what the state of your money is. What are your assets? What are your debts? What is your budget?
Right.
And you have to start from scratch. But I must say, in situations where the marriage has been very bad and there has been family violence, particularly financial abuse, divorce is a kind of a liberation. A sociologist of money in the UK studied women who had gone to refuges. And their household income before, the household income was they were in the very high income households, but they had no control of the money.
Right.
After separation and divorce, even though they had less money, they were in control of the money. They knew where it was going. They knew how to spend it. They knew where their savings were. And they felt that they themselves were in control. So it depends a lot on how you are placed, how your marriage has been, and what you bring to the divorce.
Yeah. Thanks, Professor, on that one. And before we kind of wrap up the conversation, what would be your message to our listeners?
I think every woman and every man should reflect on their story of money and really ask themselves, what do they want to do with this money? Not just for the family, but for any passions of theirs. Yeah. Right. And sometimes this whole business of, it's crass to talk about money, that, maybe you're too materialistic. I know one of my friends once asked me, how come you're always talking about money? It was as if she was telling me that I'm going sort of sinking down. Yeah. I'm not talking about the better things in life. But without money, you don't have freedom.
Right.
And without freedom, you can't really give that money away even. So if you want power over money, you have to be able to know what you want, and then you can plan where you want to be with money so that you can not only look after yourself and your family, but you can also have the power of philanthropy and giving it away. So I really think if you want freedom, you have to have the finances to have those options. And that is why I think having money is and thinking about money, not just the quantum of it, but how you want to use it to achieve whatever you want to achieve and to be the person you want to be. You have to know money.
Yeah. True. Absolutely agree with that, Professor. I am also learning it one way or the other, because I think It's better I learn it. So thank you on those words. Very, very inspiring, enlightening, and heartwarming. And to my listeners, those of you who are hearing me for the first time, I really hope that you had a lot to take away from Professor's words, because everything she mentioned about money, finances, and relationships are very, very crucial. And if you've got any thoughts or comments, please write to me at awaz-e-haqiqat@gmail.com. I'm also available on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube as well. So on that note, Professor, thank you so much for giving me your time and wisdom. Thank you.